ever offered someone a glass of water and it turned into a life-altering encounter with the divine? Okay,
Meh.
maybe not quite that dramatic.
Right.
But today's deep dive is full of those moments where hospitality and the holy, well, they collide.
Yeah.
We're unpacking Genesis chapters 18 and 21, where we'll meet Abraham and Sarah. And let me tell you, some seriously questionable choices that sparked laughter and judgment and the birth of nations.
Yeah.
Get ready, because this deep dive is about to reveal just how much those ancient stories still resonate today.
What's so fascinating about this section of Genesis is how it highlights the incredibly human responses to these extraordinary events. We see doubt, we see generosity, and yes, we even see laughter, all intertwined with God's interactions with humanity.
And speaking of laughter, there's a lot of it in this story.
There is.
But first, let's set the scene.
Okay.
We're talking about Abraham chilling out in his tent in the sweltering heat.
Yeah.
When these three mysterious visitors show up. Now, we later find out these aren't your average house guests.
Yeah.
But even before Abraham knows who he's dealing with,
Right.
his response is incredible.
It's amazing. This is key.
Yeah.
The text emphasizes that this encounter happens before Abraham's circumcision,
Okay.
which, if we connect that to the bigger picture, means he hadn't yet fully entered into that covenant with God.
Right.
Yet despite that Abraham rushes out, he bows low and insists on offering these strangers a feast fit for royalty.
Seriously, he goes all out.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking freshly baked bread.
Yes.
And not just a loaf or two.
No.
The text says he uses 3 C's of flour.
I know. That's a lot of flour.
I had to look this up, and it's a lot of flour.
Yeah.
Like enough to feed a whole village.
It's extravagant. And it's a beautiful foreshadowing of Jesus's ministry where he consistently breaks bread with everyone.
Yeah.
The marginalized, the outcast, the unexpected guest.
Right.
Abraham's radical hospitality.
Yeah.
It mirrors that radical openness of God's love.
So you're saying that by welcoming strangers, even in simple ways, we're reflecting God's own heart for inclusivity.
Yes.
How cool is that?
It's powerful.
Yeah.
But this visit isn't just about the food, right? Things get interesting when one of the visitors, who we discover is God himself, makes a shocking announcement.
Uh-oh.
Sarah, despite being well past childbearing age, will have a son.
And her reaction, well, let's say it involves some concealed giggling.
Right.
I mean, who wouldn't laugh? It's an impossible situation.
It's a very human response to the impossible.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because God doesn't rebuke Abraham for laughing at the same promise back in Genesis 17.
Right.
So why the different reaction this time? Why doesn't God let Sarah's laughter slide?
Is it because her laughter came from a place of doubt? Like she didn't believe it was truly possible?
Exactly. Her laughter, though hidden, betrayed her inner struggle with God's timing and ability. And God, who knows our every thought, addresses it directly. It's like he's saying, Sarah, I hear your doubts, but nothing is impossible for me.
Chills. Talk about being called out.
Right.
But then he goes on to reiterate this incredible promise, saying, nothing is impossible for Yahweh.
Yes.
Now, doesn't that phrase sound familiar?
It should. It's almost word for word what the angel Gabriel says to Mary centuries later, announcing the miraculous conception of Jesus.
Wow.
These parallels aren't accidents. They weave together a grand narrative, showcasing God's consistent power across generations.
So we've got divine visitors, impossible promises, and a whole lot of laughter already.
I know, right?
But hold on tight, because just as God is promising life and descendants to Abraham, he reveals a plan for judgment.
Oh.
And it involves a city called Sodom.
Oh, okay.
A city where Abraham's nephew Lot just happens to live.
This is where the story takes a turn, and we see the stark contrast.
Yeah.
While God is promising to bless and multiply Abraham's family, he's responding to the cries of the oppressed in Sodom.
Okay.
The prophets paint a grim picture of the city's wickedness.
Oh no, violence, injustice, a complete disregard for God's laws. It sounds pretty awful.
It was bad.
But God, in his mercy, doesn't just rain down fire and brimstone without warning.
No, he doesn't.
He actually tells Abraham about his plan first.
He does.
Now, why would he do that? It's not like Abraham's going to hop on the next caravan to Sodom and start handing out pamphlets.
True. But remember, God confides in his prophets.
Okay.
Amos 3.7, the Lord Yahweh does nothing without revealing his secret to his servants, the prophets.
Right.
By looping Abraham in, God reveals the depth of their relationship.
Yeah.
And he invites Abraham to participate in what he's doing, even if that participation is simply prayer.
And participate Abraham does. Instead of blindly accepting God's judgment, he boldly negotiates on Sodom's behalf.
He does.
He starts bargaining with God, trying to see if he can lower the number of righteous people needed to spare the city.
Wow.
He goes from 50 down to 40, then 30.
Talk about standing in the gap. Abraham's compassion for Sodom, even in the midst of their wickedness, is incredible. It's a powerful picture of intercessory prayer.
Right.
One person's righteousness, potentially impacting the fate of many.
Yeah.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Who are you praying for? And how boldly are you advocating for them before God?
Such a good point. But sadly, it seems not everyone in Sodom shared Abraham's heart for righteousness.
Right.
Which brings us to Lot,
Okay.
who, despite being Abraham's nephew, seems to have developed some, shall we say, questionable habits since moving to Sodom.
Yes, and it's interesting to note the subtle details the text gives us.
Okay.
Remember how the angels visited Abraham in the bright daylight?
Uh-huh.
Well, when they arrive in Sodom to check things out, it's evening.
Oh.
Darkness has already fallen.
Ooh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like the setting itself foreshadows the spiritual state of both Lot and the city he's chosen to live in.
Precisely. And it's about to get even darker.
Because now we have two angels sent by God showing up at Lot's doorstep.
Yep.
And let's just say the welcome wagon is a little less enthusiastic than Abraham's.
To put it mildly. And unfortunately, Lot's response to the situation reveals a series of, shall we say, fatal flaws.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good place to pause.
Okay.
Get ready for part 2, where we'll unpack Lot's questionable choices, explore the disturbing reality of Sodom, and uncover the surprising strength of the women in this story.
So yeah, those angels are at Lot's doorstep, and
Yeah.
let's just say things go downhill pretty quickly.
Yeah, because the last thing we heard was about this string of bad decisions.
Right.
Like, what happens next?
Well, the men of Sodom surround the house,
Oh, no.
and they demand Lot and the angels out.
Oh, no.
So they can, well, you know.
Yeah, this is where the text gets really tough to stomach.
Yeah, it's rough.
It's a stark reminder of the darkness and depravity that can take root when people turn away from God.
It's disturbing, and Lot, in a moment of panic, does the unthinkable.
What's he do?
Instead of protecting his guests, he offers his own daughters to the mob.
Whoa, hold on. He offers his daughters. What was he thinking?
It's hard to say for sure, but it seems like Lot is so caught up in like the distorted social norms of Sodom that he's willing to compromise even the most basic human decency.
It's like he's more worried about being a good host than he is about being a good father.
Right, like he's clinging to the rules of hospitality even when those rules have become completely twisted.
It's a tragic example of how our desire for comfort and acceptance can lead us down a dangerous path.
Yeah.
You know, even when it means betraying our own values.
Exactly. And sadly, Lot's string of bad decisions doesn't end there.
Oh, no. Give me more.
When the angels warn him that God is about to rain down fire and sulfur on Sodom,
Yeah.
urging him to flee to the hills for safety,
Yeah.
Lot hesitates.
He argues with the angels. Wouldn't you think fire and sulfur would be a pretty convincing reason to get out of Dodge?
You'd think, right, but he begs them to let him go to a nearby town instead.
Which town?
This place called Zoar, claiming he can't face the dangers of the wilderness.
It's like he's more afraid of the unknown than he is of God's judgment.
Precisely. And it's a pattern we often see in our own lives, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
We resist change even when we know, deep down, that clinging to the familiar might be holding us back from something better.
Totally.
It's that fear of the unknown, the fear of discomfort, that keeps us from fully surrendering to God's guidance.
And the irony is Lot fears for his life if he flees to the hills. Yet it's in those hills westward towards Abraham, where true life with God is found.
Exactly. Remember how Abraham rushed out to welcome strangers, offering them the best he had?
Yeah.
Lot, on the other hand, compromises his values and clings to a city on the brink of destruction.
It makes you think.
It does. What are we clinging to that might be hindering our own journey toward righteousness?
That's a powerful question to consider. But let's not forget, in the midst of all this chaos and bad decision-making,
Yeah,
there are two women whose stories often get overlooked.
that's right.
Sarah and Hagar.
Important voices.
Yeah. We tend to focus on the drama of Sodom and Lot's mistakes.
Right.
But Sarah and Hagar's experiences offer incredible insights into faith, resilience, and the enduring nature of God's love.
They do. So let's talk about Sarah first.
Okay.
She's often portrayed as a bit of a, well, let's just say difficult woman.
Yeah, a little rough around the edges.
She's strong-willed, she laughs in the face of God's promise,
Uh-huh.
and then she kicks Hagar and Ishmael to the curb.
Okay, so not exactly winning any popularity contests here.
No,
Yep.
but let's not forget the cultural context here.
Okay.
Sarah lived in a patriarchal society where women had very little power.
That's true.
Her laughter at the promise of a son while rooted in doubt,
Yeah.
it also reveals her vulnerability.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Imagine carrying the weight of societal expectations, the pain of infertility, and then having God promise you something that seems utterly impossible.
It makes you see her in a whole new light, doesn't it?
It does. She's not just a grumpy old woman.
Right.
She's a woman grappling with doubt, fear, and the uncertainty of God's timing.
And yet, despite her initial skepticism, she becomes a pillar of faith, the mother of a nation.
Exactly. Her story reminds us that God can work through even our most flawed and messy selves.
I like that. That's encouraging.
He sees our hearts, he hears our doubts, and he's patient enough to work through them with us.
Okay, so how does Hagar's story fit into all of this?
Right.
She's often seen as a tragic figure, a victim of circumstance.
Yes, and while it's true that Hagar's story is full of hardship, it's also a testament to incredible strength and resilience.
In what way?
Remember, she's an Egyptian slave given to Sarah as a surrogate, then mistreated and ultimately banished into the wilderness with her son.
Yeah, that's awful.
She's caught in this web of power dynamics, cultural clashes, and the fallout of Abraham and Sarah's struggles.
It's heartbreaking.
It is, but here's the thing. Even in the midst of her pain and despair, Hagar encounters God.
She does.
He sees her, he hears her cries, and he intervenes.
Yeah, when she flees from Sarah.
Yes.
Yep.
And then again, when she and Ishmael are wandering in the desert, desperate for water.
So twice God shows up.
Exactly. And it's a powerful reminder that God's compassion extends to everyone.
He doesn't play favorites.
He sees the marginalized, the oppressed, the forgotten.
Right.
Hagar's story, while difficult, is a testament to the fact that even in our darkest moments, God is present, offering comfort, guidance, and a future filled with hope.
And her story, like Sarah's, ultimately points to the fulfillment of God's promises.
Yes, he blesses Hagar's descendants just as he blesses Sarah's, creating a lineage that stretches far beyond their circumstances.
It's a beautiful picture of God's faithfulness, and it speaks volumes about the power of resilience.
It does. Okay,
No.
so we've talked about hospitality,
Judgment.
the complexity of human choices.
The strength of two remarkable women.
But we can't forget about that intriguing thread of laughter that's been woven throughout this entire story.
It's true.
It's like a subtle soundtrack to all the drama and intrigue.
Right. What's the deeper meaning behind it all?
That, my friend, is a question that leads us to a profound and perhaps unsettling truth about God.
You're killing me with suspense here. Spill the tea. What's the deal with all the laughter?
Well, to understand that, we need to consider a radical idea. What if laughter isn't just something humans do, but a divine act as well?
Wait a minute. You're saying that God laughs. God laughs. Now, that's not an image you see on inspirational posters every day. I mean, we usually think of God as serious, all-knowing, maybe even a little stern. But laughing, it's kind of hard to wrap my head around.
It's definitely a side of God we don't often talk about, but believe it or not, the Bible actually mentions God laughing several times.
Really?
And it's not always in a jovial grandpa kind of way.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Give me an example. Where in the Bible does it actually say God laughs?
One of the most striking examples is in Psalm 2.4.
Right.
It says, "The one enthroned in heaven laughs, the Lord scoffeth at them."
Scoffs. Okay, yeah, that doesn't sound like lighthearted chuckling. Who's the them in that verse? Who's God laughing at?
The them refers to the rebellious nations.
Okay.
You know, those who rage against God, thinking they can overthrow his authority and make their own rules. God's laughter in this context, it isn't about amusement. It's about power. It's like this cosmic eye roll at the futility of human rebellion against the Almighty.
So it's not a ha-ha kind of laugh, more like a you've got to be kidding me kind of laugh.
Exactly. It's a terrifying sound, a sound that reveals the vast chasm between God's power and our human limitations.
Which makes me think about all the laughter we've encountered in this story. Abraham, Sarah, even Ishmael. Are they, in their own way, reflecting this divine attribute of laughter?
Now, that is a thought-provoking question. Their laughter, in its various forms, it does highlight the gap between human understanding and God's infinite wisdom.
How so?
Well, think about it. Abraham and Sarah's laughter at the beginning, it reveals their limited view of what God can do.
Right.
They simply couldn't fathom how God would fulfill his promise, so they laughed.
And Ishmael's laughter, especially if we interpret it as mocking or malicious, that takes on a whole different meaning.
Absolutely. Some scholars even suggest that Ishmael, maybe in his teenage angst,
Oh, yeah, good point.
might have been trying to exert control over a situation he felt powerless in.
Right.
He couldn't control the fact that Isaac was the chosen heir, so he might have resorted to mockery,
Wow.
almost like a twisted attempt to grasp at a power that wasn't his to claim.
And God, witnessing all of this, laughs. He sees the absurdity of it all, our schemes, our doubts, our desperate attempts to manipulate outcomes when he's the one holding the whole universe together.
It's a humbling realization, isn't it?
Yeah.
We get so caught up in our own plans, our own desires, that we forget who's really in control.
It's easy to lose sight of that.
God's laughter, it reminds us that he's the author of the story, the orchestrator of events.
And we're not as in control as we think we are.
Not even close.
And maybe, just maybe, that's where true freedom lies.
Ooh, I like that.
Not in our feeble attempts to force things to go our way, but in surrendering to the one who sees the bigger picture, the one who laughs at the storms and calms them with a whisper.
It's about trusting in his goodness, even when things don't make sense, even when his plans seem impossible, or even laughable from our limited human perspective.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Genesis chapters 18 and 21, I think we're left with a powerful question to ponder. What makes you laugh? Where do you place your trust? And how might a deeper understanding of God's power even in world, his laughter, free you to navigate the complexities of life with, well, maybe with a bit more humility, a bit more faith, and maybe even a little bit of holy laughter yourself?